Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum. Welcome to First Chronicles, chapter 5, in which there are 26 verses. Beginning in verse 1, we see, because of his going up to his father's couch, verses, for as much as he defiled his father's bed. Now the word bed, I believe, also means couch, but we think of sofa, couch. That's not what it is, because in the Middle East, as you may be familiar, their couches are called majlis, and they look like beds, and essentially they are beds. So you could sleep on that. It's not like a sofa that you're thinking a Chesterfield or a love seat or anything like that. No, these are places where you could lie down, where you could sleep. Blessing versus birthright. Big difference. It says, and he, Reuben, was not reckoned as firstborn. So that was the blessing. In fact, Joseph is the one reckoned as the firstborn. Versus the genealogy is not to be reckoned after the birthright. And as you know, Joseph was given the double portion, Ephraim and Manasseh. Verse 2, very mighty men, I should say very mighty even among his brethren, and one was to be a ruler out of him. Talking about the tribe of Judah. Who is this ruler? It is his seed, or perhaps his sons, or one son in particular. Let's look at the Masoretic. It says here, prevailed. Judah prevailed above his brethren. So they had a big fight, big scuffle. He won. And of him came the chief ruler. So there's still a ruler coming out of him, out of his loins. But no, he didn't have a fight with his brethren. That's not what Judah. That's not what Judah does. That's talking about another brother, another individual. I believe is named Esau. He's the one who fights with everybody. Judah was very mighty even among his brethren, as the Septuagint reads. And one was to be a ruler out of him. Who was that? Well, if we look at the Lion of Judah, who came out of Judah, David. Who came out of King David? The Messiah did. The Messiah does, whether you believe it's Yeshua or whether it's Yeshua again, but the Jewish people are not recognizing him at this time as their Messiah, but they will recognize the Messiah when he arrives, and they will realize, yeah, this is the one, this ruler that came out of Judah was the Messiah, Yeshua. So that is it. This is a messianic verse, very likely. Verse 4. An omission of Benaiah, his son. And then it reads here, the sons of Gog. What does it say in the Masoretic? Gog, his son. So Gog is a very prominent name in scriptures and prophecy. And I believe it is usually Gog and Magog. There you go, Meshel Tubal, Reubenite. So there are two Gogs, apparently, according to the Masoretic anyway. Oh, and the word for bed or couch was Yatsua. Didn't really read that. Okay, continuing on. Verse 5, Joel versus that name. Actually, it's not a Elohim, so I'll just say the name, Baal, his son. And there is a Baal here, an individual, his son Baal, versus Bera. Verse 10, we read here, sojourners, talking about how Israel had, or I should say King Saul and his men, or his forces, they made war upon the sojourners in the land, versus they made war with the Hagarites, so the people of Hagar, the descendants of Hagar perhaps, all of them dwelling in their tents eastward of Gilead, versus, and they dwelt in their tents throughout all the east land of Gilead. So the Septuagint is saying the sojourners that warred with Saul, or Saul made war on them, they were the ones dwelling in these tents eastward of Gilead. Masoretic, on the other hand, is talking about how, as a result of the war that Saul had with the Hagarites lost. They fell by their hand. And as a result, Saul and his men, or his forces, dwelt in their tents, the tents of the Hagarites. They replaced them, they took over. That is not what happened. The Septuagint describes how Saul and his sojourners, or I should say, Saul and his forces, fell into their hands. So they lost to the sojourners. That's the way I'm reading it. Anyway, I could be wrong. Maybe the narrative does not agree with me, but that is how I read it in this verse. Because it describes what happens to the Hagarites later on in the chapter. Verse 12. Scribe versus Shaphat. 13, Obed versus Heber. Two prominent names as well. 14, Edai versus Jaroah. I think those are widely different. That normally I will not mention these, but how do you go from Edai to Jaroah and vice versa? Interestingly enough, the name Jaroah comes from Yaroach, which means new moon in Hebrew. Verse 15, Buz was the brother of the son of Abdiel versus, it says here, the son of, talking about the children of Abihail, Abichaiah, the son of Buz. And then it says Ahi, the son of Abdiel, the son of Guni. So, you know what? That could make sense in the Septuagint. Although I did write down here the Masoretic seems to make more sense. However, this could make sense. Yeah, it's possible. Families versus fathers. Verse 16, country round about Saron versus suburbs of Sharon. The enumeration, in verse 17, the enumeration of them all took place, versus all these were reckoned by genealogies. But these are genealogies being recorded, and that's why they're there in the previous verses. Verse 18, mighty versus valiant. Continuous difference, verse 19. Here we see what happened to the Hagarites. It says the Agarenes versus Hagarites, which were previously mentioned in the Masoretic version of verse 10. And it says here they prevailed against them. Who did? Reuben. The Reubenites won against the Agareans, or in the Masoretic, the Hagarites. So they eventually won. Perhaps they might have won in the Masoretic with Saul, but perhaps they lost, according to the Septuagint, or at least my reading of it. And it says all their tents were given into their hands versus all that were with them. So whoever their companions were, perhaps men servants, maid servants. Verse 21, 5,000 camels versus 50,000. Tenfold difference in the place of the Agarenes. Okay, where is that? Many fell slain because the war was of Elohim. They dwelt in their place until the captivity. So, in the place of the Agarenes. So, some people might read this and say, okay, the Reubenites, they lived in their place. They lived in their land. This is not what it's saying. It is saying that the Reubenites, because they defeated the Agareans, they then took over and lived in where they used to live, where the Agareans used to live. They took over. They dwelt in instead of them. The Reubenites replaced them, essentially, is what it's saying. Verse 23, there's an omission of, and they increased in Lebanon. Why would they leave that out? That's an interesting omission. Verse 24. Azrael was added. Verse 25. Rebelled versus transgressed. Yes, they're both bad, but it's more serious in the Septuagint. Yeah, they did rebel by going a whoring after the Elohim of the nations of the land. And it describes the nations, what Elohim had done to them, what Hashem did to those previous nations who worshipped those false Elohim. He cast them out. He cast out those people versus destroyed them. So he evicted them versus he obliterated them. They don't exist anymore. And that's all for this chapter. So thank you very much for your time. Till next time, I bid you all shalom aleichem, assalamu alaikum, Irini Mazisu, Pax Vobiscum, peace be unto you, and Maranatha.